One. Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Buddy Study Group for Worksite Solutions. And today we are going to go over some case studies. And I think case studies are particularly important to this study group and just this side of the long-term care industry because it's very, very new for most all of us here, or if it's not new, it's kind of reborn in a sense, right? And I think for many of you, you have not gone through your first group case yet, or maybe just on the edge of it, and it's hard to know all the nuance unless you're really in it. So, the best way that we can kind of impart some of this empirical knowledge on you guys is by giving case studies. That's about the closest we can get outside of getting you involved in a group case ourselves. So, I think it's important to speak to a number of different case studies. So from a variety of different groups, but also, it's so important not just to learn from resounding success beyond your wildest dreams, but also learn from those cases that may have been underwhelming. So we can kind of pick apart those layers and really understand why so that you know what to really look for when you're trying to find the right fit group for this side of the industry. So we'll go through a few of these and happy to answer any questions as we go. If you have any personal case studies or anecdotes that you want to share as we're going through this, we're happy to have you add to the discussion. So just throw any questions that you have into the chat and we'll answer them as we go. But Mark, as you said just before we started the call, you have a lot of case studies. We have a lot of case studies now that we've been doing this every day for quite a while. So we have a lot of them under our belt. There are a few that I have in mind that I think will be good learning experiences. And I think one of the items I want to focus on, and I have a good idea for a case study here, is a case with employer funding. And I really want this case study to really show why it's important to, if not insist on employer funding, absolutely always ask for employer funding. So, I think an early case that we had that we actually use as a case study in the group solutions page in the buddy system is a really good case study to use because this case had a ton of nuance to it and went in all sorts of different directions. But this case originally came to us as something that was really needed for the owner and spouse. There was kind of a need there to have some sort of long-term care protection in place. But we had kind of gotten them off of that concept and said, the group product will actually allow you to access this long-term care benefit you need, but also compensate some of your key employees. And we can also offer voluntary coverage to all the rest of your rank and file employees. So this group was about 200 employees. Average income was, I would say, relatively low compared to some of the other groups that we work with. But there was that employer funded component for, I'm trying to look at the numbers. Let's see.
Yeah, I remember they had a lot of like commission salespeople
Yep.
that were their employees.
Yep. This group was Florida, and I think they had a contingent in California as well. We were looking at employer funding for, I think it was like 12 or 13 executives is what we originally did this for. And if you looked at the group on paper without any sort of level of employer funding, the chances for good voluntary participation was probably pretty low. Like this would not have been a case we would have been excited to support or really wanted to support without any level of employer funding. But there were a couple of things that this group did that really allowed them to leverage a better offer overall. That's another thing. I don't think this group would have gotten the offer that they did from the carrier. This was a Chubb enrollment without number one, employer funding, but number two, they also added voluntary benefits to the package being offered alongside long-term care. So they offered accident indemnity and critical illness plans. And you know, if you've been on these study groups, carriers love when those products are added to long-term care enrollment. It's kind of their bread and butter plans. They're able to be offered affordably, which I think for some of the lower income folks was a really good option to offer alongside the long-term care because not everybody in that group was going to be able to find it affordable to come away with some long-term care benefit. So we did actually have a couple of people participating in the AI and CI plans. And I think that helped meet needs for folks who might have been priced out of long-term care. Anything you wanted to add there before we?
Yeah, I would add that this particular broker, while it had some group background, really works with individuals. In this case, the relationship with the business owner and the spouse was the key to success for the whole group. But what enabled us to be successful was we had weekly meetings, consistently for like 8 weeks in a row. And we built a relationship with the head of HR and one of their executives, and they learned more and more about the program. One of them on the call actually had a really personal experience with long-term care themselves. In fact, when we did the webinar, because as you guys know, we like to do at least one, sometimes multiple webinars for all the enrollments. He actually shared his personal story with all the other employees.
Yep.
And I don't know if you want to go into that piece of it yet,
No,
but
I think it's a good place to go because this is another one of kind of our teaching points that played out in real life is you need to find your advocate within the organization, and this was definitely our advocate. It's probably one of the easiest paths to understand your advocate, right? If they had a personal experience with long-term care that's touched them, that's made them really interested in learning about this, they're going to be a big help.
right. And just to show you how much those people supported us internally, we had a webinar and 70% showed up live to the webinar. So, 200 employees, they had 140 people, warm people in the seats, really paying attention. They were all on camera. They hosted it. We did two webinars. The second webinar also got a very large crowd. So, and then, having, our key person sharing their personal story, it was spoke much larger hearing it from that person than from us.
Right.
The need and why they were bringing it in and why they were participating. Um, I'll add something else too, Jason, just in terms of the implementation process. We really like these employer funded and voluntary to be run where the employer funded is census enrolled first. And if you guys know what a census enrollment is, it's basically they're giving you a spreadsheet with all the employees' data on it, and they are automatically enrolled in the plan without the employees actually having to fill out the application. So all the executives got auto enrolled. And then when we did the voluntary, we did more of the education, and that's where all the other employees could voluntarily choose the plan as well. The executives could choose to buy up more coverage. You could include your spouses. So it really was a good environment where everyone could participate in the voluntary, but we had this great lift because of the fact that the executives already owned it.
Yeah, and look, even though not everybody came away with an employer-funded plan, this is a prime example of just doing the employer funding actually resulted in those who were offered the plan voluntarily to have much higher limits that they were actually able to purchase because at the time, and I think still now, this for a group of this size, I think the number was 139. It turned out to be the best offer we had ever seen to that point for a group of that size. And just the demographics of the group that, like I said, initially were not favorable. So just putting that employer funding in place made those who were just being offered voluntary um, have a lot more options available to them and could purchase up to higher levels. Um, there was also some interesting, just like inner working, just little nuance things. given that it was a Florida, California group, there were a lot of Spanish speakers that were actually in this group. And that was kind of one of the challenges. Can we get some of the carrier materials in Spanish, things of that nature? We ended up accommodating there. But also, we had a key contact within HR who actually was fluent in Spanish. Spanish was actually her first language. So she actually helped us immensely by consulting with some of those Spanish speaking employees about the plan. And that's something that we don't often think about, right? There may be some language barriers in the workplace, and that's something to that needs to be addressed if you want to get the education across in the way you feel you need to. And she was just a really key advocate for us at that time and kind of breaking through that barrier. We have a question that came in, Mark. How did it work that not everybody got employer paid plans? I am used to, due to ERISA rules, that the employer paid has to apply to everyone, especially in a group of that size. You want to
So
address that?
kind of, yeah, it's complex. Every carrier takes a different position on what is covered under ERISA or not ERISA. They're not going to give you advice on it per se directly. Usually for the ERISA reporting, everyone has to be reported on. Um, with these plans are unisex priced, and some folks would say that it's important to have unisex pricing where there's the same rates for men and women. In terms of who's funded, who's not funded, I think that's also kind of another topic of debate. But in general, you can select classes of employees for life and for long-term care that excludes them from those typical rules. So again, depending on, what advice the employer gets, they may have a different interpretation, but in the marketplace, it's pretty well established that you can do an employer-funded carve-out.
Right.
It's a good question though, and it is one, when you do get it, that you'll want to talk to their people about it a little bit, and we can help as well because we've seen a lot of those questions come through.
Right. And I think we had actually created the carve out group at the start when we did census analysis. It was kind of based on highest earners, and then there was some back and forth as to who actually comprises the group, and then based on title, we ended up
Yeah,
with
I
that
think
carve out
job
group.
title is probably the number one I would start with. So that's the easiest. It's well defined in a document that the employer can have on file. So if they hire somebody new, if they meet that criteria, they would be eligible. If, they don't meet that criteria, they're not. And really that's what you want to do is really make it black and white, who's included, who's not included.
Yep.
Just so there's no kind of issues with somebody complaining about why didn't I get this?
Yeah. Um, Long story short, I think the results were fantastic. I think even the voluntary portion of the enrollment, of course, employer funded has that guaranteed participation, guaranteed premium, but I think at the end of the day, even the voluntary portion of that enrollment ended up better than I think the voluntary would have been if it was an all voluntary group. And that's really where the key started to turn for us of how important employer funding actually is. Though we had been preaching it, it started to make a lot more sense to really see it live and in color how good the voluntary participation was for, on paper, again, what we might have thought coming in, right?
Mhm. I'll give a couple of other cautionary things about this type of strategy. One is you do have to have a clear understanding of how you're going to enroll it. And what enrollment platform you use may determine whether you can do the employer funded and the voluntary combination because you have to be able to what they call stack the policies together. The carriers allow for it, but you have to have a platform that does work. Our buddy platform is built for these types of enrollments because that's what we do all the time. As well as if you have simplified issue underwriting, you have to make sure that your platform can accommodate those additional medical questions that are asked, and you need to make it easier for the employees to understand what's GI, what's SI. So a lot of what we do with our microsites, with the calculators, with the enrollment platform and the billing all revolve around having the flexibility to make it easy, but also to make it so that people can understand and you're not getting a lot of questions and confusion on the client side or and on the carrier side because they actually have to administer
Yeah.
this thing. So you have to make sure that it's set up to work. Another word of caution, and Jason, I know you kind of want to add to that, but be aware that you want to make sure that the client is really engaged in the billing process. In particular, certain carriers don't have as much transparency and visibility into billing. They have like a self-bill concept, so the employer has to know how much to pay, and then they kind of reconcile it every month, if it's off in terms of what the employer paid the prior month. But don't take that lightly. You do a great job with the enrollment, have a ton of success. All of a sudden, your client has to deal with a mess because, there's all kinds of issues with billing. That's how we see most cases are lost, meaning that the client says, I'm fed up, I can't work with this carrier anymore. And they end up, going to a different carrier. They end up just not supporting the plan anymore, not paying for the plan. So really the service is critically important. And we do see a whole wide range of outcomes, but you have to own that. Don't just hand it off to the carrier and assume it's going to be a good experience. You have to be there all the way through the process, not just at point of sale, but also throughout the servicing and even at point of claim. Obviously these claims are typically further out, but you want to be a resource where they don't have to go directly to an 800 number or to the carrier if they need help understanding how to work, with their policy itself.
Yeah, and I think the point I was going to make applies to that as well. It just really to us um, showed us the importance of having the client on calls every single week. Like you already mentioned it once before, but I can't stress it enough. Those calls don't just include some of the key HR people. It doesn't just include our team. uh, Anybody on our team could have been asked a question about anything at any time. And thankfully, we were all there to be able to address those questions as we moved throughout the enrollment and even for a couple of weeks beyond. But the carrier also is on those calls, the implementation managers. There could be just one, there could be a couple, but that sounding board for the client is so huge. And to know that you've got somebody there to address every little piece of everything that might come up in those calls um, turned out to be one of the most important things because this group was pretty particular. They knew how they wanted to do things, and that's how the carrier really likes it because the implementation managers are actually there to make sure, again, that this works in the same way as all other benefits do, and it feels comfortable to add this to their portfolio of benefits that are being offered, right? So, having a particular client is not a bad thing, but you have to kind of give them that sounding board to be able to make sure everything's all good. And at the end of every call, they were like, oh, okay, this is good. Needles moving, feeling better and better with each meeting that we have. And we're getting to the right place, right? I think it would have been a nightmare had we just, like you said, Mark, just kind of mailed it in after they said yes.
I got a question in the chat. Which carrier has the best billing system? And I don't want to call out specific carriers necessarily. Certainly, we've heard anecdotes about all of the carriers having challenges in different areas. What I will say is, I'll call out the positive ones. I do think that both Allstate and Transamerica have really good portals. They have broker portals where you can track certain things. They have employer portals where the employer can actually look at the billing. They have employee portals. And the carriers that have kind of invested in that technology have a much better ability to do that self-service. If they don't have that, then you have to rely on the carrier to give you that information, and that can really break down, especially if the carrier is bottlenecked.
If they work
But
with a third party, right, to
right.
meet that.
Right. So I would say that's kind of what we've seen just in general. But again, I just want to call out the positive players. I think the ones that have problems know they have problems and are building, enhancing their systems. But you know how that goes with carriers. You never know when you're going to get that released to you, and it can
Agreed.
be
And I
frustrating.
think that also, follows for the underwriting process too. Remember, we could be dealing with underwriting in a number of these cases. And, there are some carriers that will underwrite in-house. There are some that will use a third party for underwriting. And I think all of them have challenges as well. Absolutely. But they are all actively trying to improve no matter where they're at now. I just think those that underwrite in-house, because maybe they have experience with that before, tend to have a bit of an advantage there. But I think all stand to improve a bit. And that's true of our individual carriers as well. We have, some carriers do it better than others, but all are working to improve their systems day in and day out. It's not like they're just kind of clinging to status quo. But that's why, again, you kind of need a team to be on top of that for the client.
Yeah, and billing also depends on whether you're doing an employer-funded list bill, a payroll deduction, or an ACH direct bill. And some carriers may be strong in one of those areas and weak in another area. We tend to prefer a lot more ACH direct bill these days, and more carriers support it. In fact, almost all the carriers are starting to support it now. And that's because it's almost like you're working individually with the client, so HR doesn't have to worry about the billing. The harder part is getting it set up on the front end, making sure that you get their banking information and that goes smoothly. But then it becomes a little bit more set it and forget it, on auto draft from there on out. And when they need to take it with them, the portability is already kind of built in because it's already individually built. I know Steve, who's on camera here, you and I have talked about the carriers and that movement towards the ACH direct billing. But you have choice. Some of the employers prefer payroll deductions and can get, more business on the books because it's just a part of their normal process and it's easier to get people signed up. But then you have to really monitor it later just to make sure people don't forget to change the billing when they leave. And you do see much higher lapse rates.
Yep. Um, you know, we're generally just giving information and not doing a whole heck of a lot of self-promotion on these study group calls. But I will say that's one of the values of working with a partner, with an enrollment partner like us on any of these group cases is I've been tangential to some of the servicing and billing uh, I'll just say nightmares for lack of a better word that go into it and to handle it yourself when you're already going through your first couple of group sales in general. I cannot even fathom what that would be like. So working with a good partner, no matter who it is that's experienced in kind of handling the servicing and billing side of things and has platforms that can kind of manage some of those ins and outs, like stacking of policies, handling of simplified issue underwriting, things of that nature, is, I couldn't understate the importance there because even just being within earshot of some of that stuff gives me a migraine. So
That's
just a
what we take care for you too, Jason.
yes,
Another question, follow-up question was, will employer pay cases be on a list bill? And I would say, like, predominantly, that's how we set it up with most carriers, and the enrollment platform kind of works like it's almost like two separate groups where you have one group, which is the employer paid group. That's the list bill. And then you have a second group, which is set up as a voluntary, and that you're doing either payroll deduction or ACH direct bill. So it's a combination, and it's almost like two consecutive enrollments. But they kind of go hand in hand together, so you're not duplicating a lot of effort. Um, I'm getting these direct messages, so I could probably
yeah,
actually
yeah, I'm
copy and
good.
paste them in. But um, another follow-up from the same person is he assumes that all association type cases will be EFT. And so we're talking about employer here as our case study. But yes, when you do an association enrollment, that's also going to be that ACH direct bill, or EFT is the same concept. So if you do ACH with employers, then you would just use a very similar process for associations. Although, as we've talked about in some of these sessions, the association enrollment has a different dynamic just because it's a different type of relationship. And you do have to kind of chase people down and make sure that they put in their banking information more often on the association side, because when it's the employer can help you chase them down because they see them every day, right? As their HR person. When it's an association member, you don't have that HR person. So you really have to figure out how to get them, rein them in to make sure they finish the process yourself a little bit more.
Well, whoever asked that question, you're a segue master because one of the other case study categories I wanted to talk about is a successful association, enrollment, and relationship. And
Can
there
I
is,
can I butt in a little bit? I'm sorry.
of course, you
Only
may.
reason I want to do that is I do have, we have one group recently that was a small group case. I think because a lot of people that are on these calls have a lot of business owner clients and small group clients. I do want to mention it. We don't have to go as
No,
deep
do
on
it.
this one.
Do it.
But we had a case, it was actually one of our partners that was enrolling, they're an agency enrolling their own employees, and they have 6 employees. So it was a small group case. As we know, there's 2 carriers that go down to, 3 or 5 lives, and getting, 6 applications is really the minimum. So doing employer funding was kind of a necessity. They looked at the different levels of how much they wanted to fund, and they chose kind of the middle level, good, better, best, choose the middle. That happens quite a bit. And then they allowed for a little bit of a voluntary buyout. So that case we actually ran a little bit differently because it was such a smaller group and it was actually our partners. So we knew every employee already. We just hosted a webinar. We went through the enrollment process. They had already known a lot about the product because they're actually offering this product to their clients. So they're buying it for themselves. And that we actually just enrolled the census enrollment and the voluntary at the same time. We didn't need to do this kind of staggered approach, right? Where we did the census and then like the next month we did the voluntary. Because again, it was just 6 people and they could immediately kind of decide how much they wanted to buy. And it was like a 1 week enrollment. It was just a very different dynamic. So you can adjust. This is not something prescribed where you have to follow this checklist and you have to do it a particular way. And you can even use a different enrollment platform or billing method for different groups that you work on, depending on what's the best fit. So I wanted to point that out because you're doing a 6 person case, right? Make it simple. That's really critical to a lot of these enrollments. I got a question just the other day from an employer that runs like a venture capital backed technology company, super busy, as you can imagine, right? Every week's a new adventure for them. And they're like, well, we want to do long-term care, but we're so busy, we just don't have time to do it. How long do I have to commit to this? We basically said like an hour or two a week for 4 to 6 weeks, and that's it, and you're done. Like, okay, that's a lot less than I thought it would be. So you do have to make sure that you adjust your process to accommodate your client as well, but you do need to know what conditions make for a successful enrollment. So
Yep.
I hope that's helpful, Jason. I just wanted to cover
Super, super.
common cases you guys are going to run into every single day, and 6 person case, easy. That's the answer. Make it easy for them, and they'll move forward, and your enrollment experience, it's a lot less complex.
Yeah, and I mean, the simplicity of it. Obviously, on the operations side, there were some things to put together as far as the platform goes and getting everybody's information, things like that. But um, simplicity was kind of key here on the sales side. I mean, you call it a webinar. We had a 30-minute call with them just to kind of walk them through it. And it helped that, again, they were offering this to their clients. And I think probably the best way to get experience and to understand truly how to sell this to your clients is to be a client. If it makes sense for you and your employees, that's a really, really good way to learn. So they had already been learning the product, but I mean, it was a 30-minute call. We walked them through the calculator. We talked through some of the enrollment platform steps, and that was the extent of the employee education. The other good thing about small groups, especially ones where everyone is funded, everybody's invested in learning about the product, right? Regardless of whether or not they're trying to offer it to clients. So there's talk going on about the plan where everybody's kind of teaching themselves about the plan with the materials that we put together, right?
Mhm.
So there's just a lot of benefit there. And at the end of the day, there wasn't a huge amount of benefit extra that people could buy above the employer funded amount, but 5 out of 6 ended up purchasing more coverage. And at the end of the day, the voluntary premium ended up being 25% of the overall, something of that nature. So just a really, really good experience on the whole. You don't have to fund to the highest level in order to, get some voluntary participation, getting people's foot in the door. I think there's something psychological about it being more difficult to reach into your own pocket to get from nothing to something than it is to go from something already purchased for you to something more. I really think there's something psychological there, and that's another really big detail that employer funding can really do. It get
I think it's practical too. It's like I already own this anyway, so I'm gonna
right.
need to know what this policy is.
Hey,
I
looks
might as
pretty good.
well.
I might as well add to it. And I
Definitely
think
make it
one of
hard.
the things that made this particular case study a success too is just the product fit. I mean, the Allstate 5% plan is just a fantastic offering right now. It's a very easy offering to say yes to. And I think that product market fit is just like super, super good at the end of the day. So that's something to consider as well. But I'm glad you brought up that case. I didn't have it written down, but it's a really good one. And like you said, it speaks to the most common groups that you all are going to run into, at least in the very beginning, is those smaller, more intimate groups. Um, so do you want to give a couple minutes on association? Because I think we've kind of not necessarily finished. These are ongoing relationships, but we've kind of seen an association through, I think all of the good points that you look out for with an association. So we've done an enrollment for members, a couple of enrollments to this point for members, and we've done an enrollment for employees of this association. And there's a ton of strength of relationship there. I actually visited their annual convention just last Friday, got to see it kind of boots on the ground, and the strength of relationship and just um, the way that the association's insurance arm of sorts is there for association members was truly astounding. It really changed my perspective on what makes a good association versus an association that maybe you don't offer anything to because you really want a good match here. We've talked about associations plenty of times, and said not all associations are created equal. You really need a strong heart of the association to be able to take this and run with it and communicate and get the word out. And it just last week just reaffirmed for me that this is a very, very strong association. So we started the enrollment with members about a year ago, year and a half ago. I mean, obviously there was pre-sale and all those conversations happening before that, but that's when we really started to find out that the internal sales team for the association was really, really good at kind of getting the word out. And of course, they actually have incentives based on who signs up, members that sign up for specific products. And this was something in their kind of incentive structure. So their salespeople were obviously really sharp and really on the ball. Um, but as far as like the association level enrollment, what lessons do you think were most important to take away from that, Mark?
I mean, I think you really have to look at associations that do have an insurance department, right? That is going to be right now the low-hanging fruit because they probably offer life, disability, and probably haven't offered group long-term care, maybe individual long-term care, but not group long-term care. So I would start there. They're going to need a specialist and a partner and someone who has the relationships with this particular segment of carriers, has the right type of enrollment platform and process. Again, that's where we can be helpful to you is that that's going to differentiate you to win the case. We need to have that day-to-day relationship person. We need to have someone who actually can sell the concept, to the association insurance agency itself. Once they latch on to that, they really are your partner in this. They're going to guide you to how their members typically buy these types of products because they're doing it day in and day out. The associations you have to kind of be careful about are the ones that don't have a background in offering voluntary benefits or life and disability benefits. Maybe they offer professional liability, maybe they offer, other products on the P&C side, health insurance. But if they don't have that experience, then it's unlikely you're going to get an initial lift.
Yeah.
And what that means is it could be a good case still potentially, especially if it's a larger type of association that's located in one particular state. It's just easier to get proposals from the carriers, but you'll need more of a sales motion that you develop. You'll have to kind of bring in salespeople that can reach out to the members directly. So just be cognizant of that. And just like the Plura side, if you have benefit counselors there in person, you're going to have better participation. If you have a sales team that's reaching out, better yet, in person attending their conventions, you're going to have better results. Associations build over time. So you have to be patient with it and you have to make sure the carrier understands they have to be patient with it. And each enrollment we do builds on the last. So a lot of times we're doing perpetual enrollments for the first 12 months, or we might have four enrollments in the first 12 months, which you have to get the carriers to allow you to do. But if you're setting it up appropriately for each one, you're going to see the first one's like a pilot. 3 months later, everyone's kind of gotten familiar with it and you know what channels are most effective. Then it grows. The next one grows. And then the last one is kind of like your the peak because this might be the last GI period.
This is it.
Now it's your chance. And hopefully they've heard about it, maybe heard about it from other members within the organization. You have internal advocates maybe at that point who work with the components. Maybe there have been face-to-face conventions, things of that nature. So there's quite a lot that goes into building that whole advocacy. If the group is too small, and what I would say small for associations tends to be under 2,000 members, then a lot of things aren't going to scale as well, including the carrier getting comfortable that it's worthwhile for them to do the filings that are necessary specifically for that association. Plus, they have to do it for each state. And that can be a real barrier if you're not working with a single state association. So we do get a lot of inquiries from the community or from the Buddy INS community about different types of associations. Definitely bring them to our attention. We'll try to help you troubleshoot it, problem solve, see if we can find proposals. But the ones that tend to be more difficult are the ones that are dispersed, not large enough, and are nationwide. Getting a group offer might be challenging.
Yeah, and I realized the first enrollment we had for this association was actually a year ago because it was the same event that I went to last week, last year that you attended. That's really
Right.
where we started that trial period, so you could actually get FaceTime with folks and just speak to them face to face. But it was just so great to see the system that they had set up there and the preparation that was sort of put into place to really help members out. So they had specialists at tables at their booth for any of the products that a member could come up and ask about. And, I sat at their booth for most of the morning into the later afternoon. And when people came up to me, when members came up to me to ask about products, I was probably asked about, no lie, 15 to 20 different products, and there was a specialist available that could talk to them about any of them. So clearly, they're getting a very high level of service at this in-person event. And I would say, 20 to 40% of the people I talked to said, I've been with this association's insurance arm. I've been a client for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, even 40 years of affinity with this organization. That's what we really mean by strength of relationship between the association and some of its internal organizations. So that was really the lesson for me, those cultural things, those strength of relationship, the experience of the sales team, like those are truly the items for me that make the difference between a good association and one where you really don't know what the results are going to be, at least looking from the inside out.
Yeah. And as you do more business, just like with any line of business that you've worked in throughout your career in the insurance space, you're going to find new opportunities from that same type of community. So when I went there last year to one of the conventions, I went to the different vendor booths, just to learn more about, kind of the ecosystem around it. And lo and behold, one of them was a benefit firm that offered voluntary benefits to another, trade association, and we ended up actually partnering with them as well. So it led to a new opportunity, just being kind of showing up in person, and them being really impressed by the offer that the one association got that they wanted to bring it in as a benefit to their other clients. So you just kind of again have to show up, add value, educate, do what you do. And because you're a specialist in this area, it's going to be very hard for them to do it without your help.
Right. Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that account management was also just critical to the success of this association. Because, by the way, we did the enrollment for members, but then we also enrolled all of the internal employees in an all-state 5% plan as well. And it was an all voluntary enrollment, but again, strength of relationship, people who understand the products, things of that nature made us feel a bit more comfortable with it. But the voluntary results were incredible, because they had actually been on the front lines dealing with these types of products, understood the value, and a lot of folks, made that choice to engage with our communications, attend the webinars, and ultimately sign up. I would say the most educated questions we ever got on a webinar were probably for these employees.
Mhm.
But again, that kind of shows you how the opportunities can fan out from working with a really good association. But our account manager on that case, Evan, is just fantastic. I went to this event last week partially to support him during his presentation, where he was going to be talking about what we're offering to members and the level of preparation, just um, you know, really spoke to me, and the way he addressed all of the members that came up to us individually was something that I was really proud of, and just made me happy that we have him as a team member. And having somebody like that on your side as well really helps you scale and work with more organizations than just one, because it can seem like a full-time job sometimes. So having a really good account manager also matters, even if we have this really skilled sales team internally with the association. Um, so I think that's about what I have for that case study. Um, we're about 15 minutes to the top of the hour. I wanna talk about maybe general or specifically cases that haven't been successful, because it's not like we're up here batting 1,000 with 100 grand slams and 100 at bats. There are cases that end up underwhelming, and there are obviously reasons for that. So whether you want me to volunteer one or you have one specifically and some of the lessons learned, I think a couple of the things is like, oh, for sure. I have my reasons why I think we can do this voluntary and have good success, and just incorrect product market fit are like two of the lessons I take from a couple of them.
Yeah, actually, that's the one I was going to start with. And I'll kind of spin it a little bit positive after we share kind of the negative, which
Good
was,
relationship and at the end of the day.
yeah, we rolled a product that was really an individual product that has been, I'll call it retrofitted for Worksite. And you guys know that there are several individual carriers out there that kind of market it that way. Doesn't have the guaranteed issue, definitely at a higher starter plan type of price point, more of a complex product. Education went really well. We had hundreds of people attend our webinars. Advocates, at the executive level that brought this in the first place, virtually zero, zero enrollments. So not working with the GI product, not working with quick and easy, being able to get to low price points is really a killer. Didn't have the employer funding, which is something we kind of pushed on, but just wasn't going to happen with this particular broker who did individual coverage for all the executives already. Um, I'm going to spin the positive though.
There
They
was a
can
lot of
still
positive.
they can still pivot and get a proposal from a group carrier, do GI. We're going back to them to see if if they're willing to put in a contribution because they built a relationship with us and they saw the effort, we all put into it. They want to be able to get value for their employees from long-term care planning. So game's not over yet.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about groups is every year you get to re-engage, you get to add new people. And quite frankly, you have a platform where you had several hundred people learning about long-term care planning and long-term care insurance from you.
Yeah, that's a point I want to make. I mean, we want to speak to, underwhelming final results and find out why or how we got there, but there were plenty
Mhm.
of positives along the way, and I don't think there's going to be a case out there that's a complete stinker.
Yeah.
Nothing to ever write home about unless you have no capacity to educate people about long-term care. That's always something we talk about and always something that we take with us. The webinars were really well attended. There was great culture in the employer.
Mhm.
Just a couple of things kind of led to the results the way they were. And it's not as if there was no interest, because there were plenty of people who were in progress with their application, but decided at the end of the day not to finish.
Yeah, you,
They,
you had to in that case have somebody to meet face to face with them to help them finish that process.
right.
So there would have been a decent amount, I would say, as what we would see with an all voluntary group enrollment if there was boots on the ground and somebody to kind of finish that process. But because there wasn't, again, that one of those key ingredients is missing, that's where I would say it fell short. So cautionary tale, that's what we talk about in these sessions most often is those products that are going to check all the boxes and create that experience and also the results that you can kind of write home about. You know that it's going to work if you set up the right conditions.
Yeah, and I think that's why we also say that if you're hitting 5 to 10% on an all voluntary enrollment, you should be really, really happy with the results as
Mhm.
well. I mean, obviously there are ways you can set up the conditions and do really good education to ensure that you're hitting there with regularity. But like, for the association employees I was talking about, I think we hit around 13% and the carrier was like jumping for joy, right?
Mhm.
So it's about educating folks, but if you come away with 5 to 10% of an employee base signing up for your life with long-term care product, that's excellent given how much time you actually have to um, you know, get them an understanding about how the product works and then get them to understand that it makes sense for them to enroll,
Yeah,
right?
and I will point out something else too, which participation percentage is really important. It gives the carrier a spread of risk, but overall premiums are actually much higher per person on the voluntary side. So the employer funded contribution, very often, they're not going to do the full GI amount. Maybe they'll do like a base plan or a base plan just for the executives, something of that nature. But the employees, when they see the value of the plan, they will buy the maximums. It is worth it to push the carriers to give you higher GI limits. Our average premiums with these associations that tend to be, higher earning, trade associations, it's probably north of $4,000 a year on the group side, which isn't a big number on the, individual side, right? It's probably the average. But on the group side, the average is probably $1,000 or less a year. So you're getting 4 times the average premium for the voluntary
And
participation.
I think there's a couple of things that contribute to that. Number one, being able to see the value on the calculator instead of just here's your premium. I think the calculators do have a good deal to do with that. I think the specialist consultants and account managers we have working with people one to one also help people understand the value. I think it does come from a value-oriented discussion at the end
Mhm.
of the day instead of just here's what it costs and here's your benefit, but here's the value for your dollar that you're getting out of this plan. That helps people climb the ladder as far as what benefits they're purchasing too.
On the employer side, voluntary, probably $2,000 to $3,000 a year premium. So it's going to be like a little bit lower, but still much higher than your average that you would typically see. A lot of this depends also on how you offer it and how you present, what minimums you present and how you kind of position it. But all in all, people do take the opportunity once they see why this value is just as good or better, maybe than on the individual side, to make a more comprehensive purchase of it.
Yep.
But they have to take time to understand it first.
100%. We have a good question here in the chat that was sent to me. Are we able to use Buddy INS as an enrollment team? For example, if I am on one side of the country and my client has an office on the other side of the country, can I use an LA Buddy agent or like if I'm on the East Coast and I need a West Coast Buddy agent, can we do any sort of in-person enrollments?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, most of the enrollments we do digital no matter what. So everybody has access to a web page, tools that they can use, from their desk or from their mobile device. They're enrolling actually self-enrollment, a lot of times through an electronic application, and the billing is electronic. So it's designed to be end-to-end electronic. That being said, we have obviously Jason mentioned he was at a conference on Friday. We do go to a lot of client events. There may be reasons to have the in-person relationship developed. So that's not definitely off the table. It's a possibility. Usually our partners are the ones that have the in-person relationship. So they might be in the office, we might be on the web presenting. So believe it or not, we can do both of those things together as well. But it kind of depends on what the situation is and what the needs are. We can also bring in outside specialists. Many of you have heard us talking about we have this specialist team that we bring into a lot of enrollments. We pay, fee for service for some enrollments. We do a commission split for some enrollments. So if we have someone local that we can bring in that's a specialist to help you. We also have the ability, because of just the support of you guys in the community, to be able to add those resources, boots on the ground. But licensing, as you guys know, we're licensed in all 50 states. It's fairly straightforward to add a new state license, so that it's not really a constraint from a carrier perspective. It's more just, what works best for the client.
100%. Anybody else have any questions or Mark, anything you want to sort of round these up with? I think that was a really good collection of case studies with a lot of lessons to learn from them. But anything else you want to add?
No, I love these sessions. I hope you guys like them too. It's just more fun to talk about real activity and real results. Definitely share your own case studies. We can do more sessions where you're sharing your case studies and we're helping also kind of give feedback or learning from what you're doing. Log into the buddy system as well. That's why we built those quick quote tools. We also have some case studies that Jason wrote up in the buddy system in the sales guides. So you can find a lot more information just to get some like hands-on experience with it. And I would say, the key to all of this is just going out there and giving it a try. You're never going to feel comfortable the first time you do these things. You just have to kind of like go out there prepared, but keep it simple and follow that process. And again, you're just going to get a lot of experience very quickly presenting it. If you kind of wait until you're comfortable or when there's the right opportunity, sometimes it never comes along. So that's all I can say is definitely push yourself to give it a shot.
Yep. So I just took a quick tour of a couple of those case studies, but they're in the playbook section here in group solutions. So make sure you've got your dial set to group solutions, and then the playbooks are right here if you ever want to take a look at them.
Okay. We have one more question in the chat. It's kind of product specific. Is Allstate 5% one of the best long-term care policies? Obviously, best is in the eye of the beholder, right? We like that product in the group space, one of the top options, because it's been a long time since you've been able to get that inflation rider on a guaranteed issue plan. And partly the reason for that is a lot of the carriers are afraid of the risk, right? They're offering a much more comprehensive benefit. So what we try to do with that plan, especially, is to make sure that there is employer funding, because that means that we're going to get more spread of risk and participation. So that's my one caveat about it. The other thing about it is that it can make the conversation a little bit more complex. It's just one more lever in the policy that you have to explain. We built that calculator, that quick quote calculator in the buddy system to show that leverage really intuitively and easily. So I think you need tools like that to offer it, because we hear actually from Allstate directly that it is hard for benefit brokers that are not into the long-term care space to get their arms around it and to explain it to clients. Jason's showing what it looks like with that quick quote calculator. We're calculating those future benefits with that 5% growth for you. So somebody doesn't have to think about, well, what does this mean? We just are showing the numbers, but the carriers aren't going to provide this type of illustration for you, most of the time. We had to build this calculator to help explain it. Jason's kind of showing how it looks initially when you run the numbers, and then what happens when you move out the claim age into the future, so you can see what that 5% growth does. But as long as you can make it easy to understand, then it can work for the work site, right? Because you might have that webinar and you're speaking to 100 people for half an hour, and you have to bring a lot of concepts to the table, including caregiving and long-term care planning, in a very short period of time. So the use of these types of tools is invaluable to us. I don't know what we would do without this tool. So some brokers prefer not to have the inflation protection, not to have the extension riders that we like, because in their view, it makes it simpler to understand the product.
And not
You don't
even to
have to
have
explain those
anything beyond
details.
guaranteed issue, right? They don't even want to have underwriting tiers above GI because it's just hard to explain, right?
Hard to explain, hard to enroll. So my answer, I know it was a little bit fuzzy, is we love the options. We love the flexibility. As I mentioned, our average premiums are 3, 4 times the average because we really go that extra mile to help people maximize the value of what they're being offered. I would say the large portion of the market does the opposite. And that can work well for other brokers too. So best There is no best. There's what is right for your client. And being an expert in this allows you to choose the right fit. And that's what makes you so valuable as a broker, right? You're actually able to shop the market and choose the right fit.
100%. I agree. Um, all right. I think that's all the questions we've gotten through. Really appreciate you being here just to kind of hear some story time and hear a lot of the lessons that we take away. I started to realize that, we give kind of our principles and teachings like lessons we learn, but it's nice to be able to tell the stories that kind of determine how we got there in our principles that we share with you all. So um, happy to have done it. Again, if you have any other case studies, feel free to share with us. I would love to invite you onto the study group, keep things anonymized, kind of like we did here, and just kind of talk it through for a learning experience for everyone if you found it valuable. And I'll be looking out for some folks to do that. So thank you very much for being here. Be well, and we'll talk to you this time next week. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.